And now joined by our great friend Kyle Neddenriep, who has been busy as the football season is getting close. High school football getting closer. You've got Mr. Football candidates have been announced, but that's a long way off and just throwing out. So that's a group that will change. There will be some that probably drop out and some that will come in over the course of the season. But you get to put it all out there and take all the crap from the people.
That's part of it. That's part of it. If you're going to put your name on it and put the names out there, it's part of the deal. But I think going into this year, Drake Bowen to me is probably the guy who has the most impressive credentials, going into the season. And I did hear from somebody who said, well, you can't have any front runners. The season hasn't started yet. It's like, well, what's the fun of that? So, if you can't even list anybody. So I think that's not a fair way to look at it either. But I think Drake Bowen, he was Gatorade Player of the Year last year. He won a state championship, best player on, a really good team. They're not a 6A team, so I won't say they're the best team in the state, but he's definitely proven himself. I think he's the top overall prospect in the state as far as if you look at recruiting rankings, and I know that's not part of the discussion necessarily, but I think it's just another feather in his cap. So to me, he looks like the kind of the front runner going in pretty clearly. But a lot of good candidates out there. It's kind of interesting. We don't have that like last year with Brady Allen and in other years, we don't have that quarterback that's like, oh man, this is kind of the guy to beat necessarily. So, that's a little bit different this year. So, it's like you said, Jim, I mean, it'll play itself out. Guys will come in and out based on how they do early in the season. But yeah, I think Bowen's probably the guy to start with.
And I also a little bit. This has been a little bit, but the North-South All-Star game happened a while back. I only mention that because it's the Shrine. It changed names for a while. Now back to the Murat Shrine North-South All-Star game. I mention that only because way back when I was in college, I was the sports information director for the South team, which that was awesome and fun. It actually help propel my career, but it's great to see that back. Not that it ever stopped having All-Star game, but the Shrine, it should always be the Shrine game. I just always loved that. We'd have to go. Herb Smith he worked at IU, but he headed that up, and we'd always go to the Shriners Club like once or twice a week. He had meetings, and I'm a kid in college, and he's ordering these Beefeater. He's passed away now. So, but he had Beefeater martinis, and he particularly loved for you to drive so he could enjoy his Beefeater martini as we cruise in that big Lincoln going to whatever next meeting we were going to. But fun days, it's just fun times. But glad to see that. But yeah, big season coming up. You've got a lot of guys who are trying to make names for themselves. As you mentioned, the Mr. Football race obviously it's not Mr. Basketball. It will never be Mr. Basketball in Indiana, but it's become a lot more of a prestigious award as the years go by.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's. I know the interest level in it's really high. And there's always the position awards are something a little bit different too that the IHSAA does that honors. Kids who probably aren't going to have it. A lot of times, the offensive line, they just don't have, even the year, Blake Fisher, who went on to Notre Dame, he played at Avon. He's a great offensive lineman, sensational, but he doesn't have any numbers, so you can't really compare. So I think that's a cool thing they do, to have position awards too, kicker and things like that. So it's a unique award. It's different than Mr. Basketball, like you said, but it's I think every bit is level of interest for sure. I think in some years maybe even more so. The year Jack Kaiser won over David Bell, they changed the voting process because people. I think it was a good change. Not to say Jack Kaiser shouldn't have won it, but But now they have more coaches vote. They don't have the panel like they used to. It's a huge, basically anybody who has a IHSAA membership who's part of the coaching staff can vote now. So I think the more votes, the better, which I think Mr. Basketball actually has they had, at least anyway in the past, a better process because you have, coaches
better
can
mixed.
vote and media can vote. So you have just a bigger number, it's a wider swath. It's a better cross section, I think. But now, I think it'll be better moving forward.
Dylan thinks that it should be Mr. Football should be one of those great offensive linemen that comes out of Fort Wayne.
Look, we have 3 of them from Fort Wayne on IU's roster right now. All I'm saying is that any one of them could have been Mr. Football.
That's who they get. Hey, that's where IU gets their if it's an in-state offensive lineman, the chances are better than not that they came from Fort Wayne.
That's we're providing the protection for whoever IU's quarterback ends up being.
Well, eventually. I don't think I'd brag about that right now because that is not exactly been the case. But and Kyle, that's been to me. You want to talk about IU football? Man, you just see so many of the great, and we've talked about this before when Clemson and Ohio State played for the national championship. Or played in a couple of years ago when you had two Indy guys going against each other. But Indiana just cannot land a top lineman recruit from the state. If they're a top recruit, they're going elsewhere. If it's whether it's Ohio State or Clemson or Michigan, and man, that is killing Indiana, in my opinion. If they could just recruit the top recruits from this state, it would unbelievably improve the program because it all starts up front. We saw that last year, how badly they were and how badly that line was, and it just went.
Well, yeah, and I know we talked a lot on the show about Caden Curry, and as his recruitment was progressing, and Indiana was really a factor. I mean, I know he, it wasn't just a show. I mean, he really did like Indiana. He liked Tom Allen, but I always say, like, once Ohio State offers a Central Indiana kid, and probably Fort Wayne and anywhere else in the state, it gets really hard to beat out Ohio State. That's the one. I think anybody else, in the Big Ten, you can battle up against, and but Ohio State and probably Michigan, those are the two. That it gets pretty hard, especially Ohio State. So. I knew once Ohio State really got after, Caden Curry, you go back to DeJuan Jones too. You can go back down the list through time. But, once Ohio State gets serious, it's kind of lights out at that point. And that's kind of what happened with Caden Curry.
Well, that was why it was that's why at the time Samson James' commitment seemed so important for IU, was because it showed that, regardless of how good Samson James ended up being, it showed that they could get someone that Ohio State wanted and get them and bring them to IU. And that's why it seemed important at the time. It just hasn't kind of played out that way.
And I thought, when Tommy Stevens committed from Decatur Central, this has been a few years ago, but he's quarterback. And I was like, man, this is the guy, I really thought could get things going there. And they've had pretty good quarterbacks in the last several years, but then, he ended up decommitting and going to Penn State. And I really thought I'm bad. I think I've told you before, like, I've kind of given up trying to predict quarterbacks at the next level. It's just hard to know how they'll fit into a system, and there can only be one pretty much playing. But man, I thought he was going to be good for IU, and ended up having to decommitting and go elsewhere. But it's getting in-state recruits is important. Purdue has actually done a good job in this current class of getting some frontline. Like Jerron Tibbs, they beat out Iowa for him. I think he's going to be a really good receiver at Purdue. And there's others too that I think Purdue and Iowa really have kind of gone head to head on a lot of guys here lately, especially in our immediate area.